Welcome to the Dark Horse Paranormal Podcast, Episode 5. I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm Kristen Johnson.
We've got a great podcast for you. We're going to talk about Native American atrocities,
King Philip's War,
the assimilation and destruction of Native American culture,
and John Eliot's praying towns.
We're going to talk a little bit about Native American history and present the data from our investigations at Anawan Rock in Rehoboth, Massachusetts,
where Captain Benjamin Church captured and killed Sachem Chief Anawan, marking the end of King Philip's War.
Also, we're going to present data from our investigations at an old Indian burial ground in the former praying town of Grafton, Massachusetts. And why would we do this?
Out of respect for the indigenous people of the Americas.
And also to figure out why the fuck these places are haunted. So without further ado,
let's get this mother rolling.
In the pre-Columbian era, that is before Christopher Columbus murdered, raped, and enslaved the Caribbean and southern portion of the Americas, the continent and their indigenous people had limited exposure to the widespread diseases of Europe, and therefore they had limited immunities against smallpox, bubonic plague, chickenpox, cholera, diphtheria, influenza, malaria, measles, scarlet fever, typhoid, typhus, tuberculosis, various STDs, and the common cold.
In April 1614, Captain John Smith landed at the then unfounded Ipswich, Massachusetts. Native Americans in the North Shore area were believed to have numbered in the thousands. But 20 years later, when Ipswich was settled, the Anawan people had been reduced to less than 100 natives.
It is thought that over 18 million Native Americans lived in North America alone prior to the explorers and settlers that crossed the Atlantic, bringing with them a tidal wave of disease. Between the years 1616 and 1619, the native population was reduced to just 10% of what it had once been. Puritan colonists arrived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, only to find empty and abandoned villages for them to occupy.
Although not taught in children's history classes, it is no secret that the early settlers, due to their lack of survival skills, would resort to digging up the graves of the Native Americans and even their own children to find sustenance in the exhumed flesh.
The war between the Native Americans and the colonists started in 1675 in Swansea, Massachusetts. Swansea and its surrounding areas are part of what is known today as the
Bridgewater Triangle,
an area renowned for its extraordinary paranormal activity.
Some theorize that the atrocities of King Philip's War and the theft of land is exactly why it's so haunted.
We visited and investigated an old Indian burial ground in Hassanamesset Praying Village, or what is now known as the town of Grafton, Massachusetts.
This small parcel of land contains members of John Eliot's Praying Indians, who were Nipmucks in this case, and was the first established burial ground of that settlement.
The current configuration of the cemetery, with its distinctive granite and fieldstone retaining wall, granite steps, and granite block gateposts, was created in the 1920s as a resting place for the remains that were unearthed during additional road construction on Route 122, a main road in Grafton.
The cemetery is modest to say the least, and includes a row of unmarked stones across its front and a larger stone and dedication plaque at its center.
The cemetery, however, has been a regular part of Nipmuc tribal activities and celebrations ever since.
Praying towns were developed by the Puritans of New England from 1646 to 1675, led by English missionary John Eliot, ending just prior to the start of King Philip's War.
This was an effort by the white man to convert the local Native American tribes to Christianity and American culture. This was the first attempt, but not the last, of total assimilation and destruction of the Native American lifestyle, spirituality, and traditions.
The natives in these towns went to church, had their hair cut short, and dressed in the colonists' clothing. Their safety was always at risk, as the colonists didn't necessarily trust them, and the tribes considered them traitors.
we visited and investigated an old Indian burial ground in Hassanamesset Praying Village, or what is now known as the town of Grafton, Massachusetts.
This small parcel of land contains members of John Eliot's Praying Indians, who were Nipmucs in this case, and was the first established burial ground of that settlement.
The current configuration of the cemetery, with its distinctive granite and fieldstone retaining wall, granite steps, and granite block gate posts, was created in the 1920s as a resting place for the remains that were unearthed during additional road construction on Route 122, a main road in Grafton.
The cemetery is modest to say the least, and includes a row of unmarked stones across its front and a larger stone and dedication plaque at its center.
The cemetery, however, has been a regular part of Nipmuc tribal activities and celebrations ever since.
Praying towns were developed by the Puritans of New England from 1646 to 1675, led by English missionary John Eliot, ending just prior to the start of King Philip's War.
This was an effort by the white man to convert the local Native American tribes to Christianity and American culture. This was the first attempt, but not the last, of total assimilation and destruction of the Native American lifestyle, spirituality, and traditions.
The natives in these towns went to church, had their hair cut short, and dressed in the colonists' clothing. Their safety was always at risk, as the colonists didn't necessarily trust them, and the tribes considered them traitors.
So Kristen and I were spending a Saturday afternoon together. I think it was a Saturday, maybe a Sunday. And we're looking for something to investigate, somewhere to go, something different. We were trying to get our other investigation off our mind of the undisclosed location in the haunted Houghton, haunted Houghton Mausoleum, which you can hear about in our other podcasts. And I came across this old Indian burial ground in Grafton, Massachusetts. So we decided to take a drive out. We did find it, and it's on a busy road, Route 122. As mentioned, we parked across the street and kind of had to run across the road so we didn't get run over and get buried ourselves, right? And as mentioned previously, it's very basic in there, and we tried to capture some EVPs, which we really didn't get anything there, and did a spirit box session and placed the spirit box on the main rock that's kind of in the center of this thing.
It has a plaque on it.
Yeah, it has a dedication plaque. And you had a pink shirt on that we had bought the day before.
Right, and it was at a healing and spiritual expo at Crystals and things.
Expo, and that was pretty cool. And we bought some swag and
crystals.
And
Can never have enough.
Can't have too many crystals.
But
we also met Amy Major that day.
Yes.
You had this shirt on. It's pink and it says "Believe" across it, and it's kind of the symbolic letters that look like those coexist shirts or bumper stickers that you see pretty often.
Just for confirmation, I asked if they knew what my shirt had said.
That's right. And sure as heck, they came back with the answer. And here's that clip.
You know what my shirt says? You know what my shirt says?
So you can hear there, I've looped it twice, and they say "believe." Mm-hmm. And that was pretty mind-blowing for us to play back. But something that was even more mind-blowing is recently, as in a couple of weeks ago, when we went on this investigation a while back, around the time of Thanksgiving, I believe, because we're all into this Indians and Thanksgiving and the real meaning of Thanksgiving thing. I was playing an really old clip we had taken, our recording Spirit Box session, and I came across a clip that sounds almost identical, but at a slightly higher pitch than the one you just heard.
Yeah, and that was months ago.
Months and months before we got this recording, and it didn't make sense at the time, and we didn't think anything of it. But I was just going back and listening to some of our older data. It's nice to play stuff back and get a fresh perspective, and you tend to hear things you missed the first time around. And this was something we would have just skipped over because it didn't make any sense at the time. But I've taken the clip you just heard. We hear "believe" twice. Believe. And the clip I found that was probably at least 6 months older than that. It made no sense at the time, but it's kind of funny. And let me play that clip for you now.
You know what my shirt says?
I have no idea what that means, but it kind of brings up the idea of like parallel universes or
dimensions
or timelines.
Like they could see your future, your past.
You know, why was that there? It seems so similar. I mean, is it coincidence? Maybe, but boy, it really sounds a lot like that clip.
It's the same thing. So I don't.
Yeah, it's
I don't
so
understand. Right.
You know?
How it could be the same exact thing from months, like 6 months before.
Right, and it had no relevance to what we were talking about at the time.
None at all.
So it was just something we skipped over, and then I came across, and I was like, oh my God, Chris, you got to hear this. It sounds just like our other clip.
It is so bizarre.
So this next clip is pretty interesting. That afternoon before we left, I was looking at a crystal, and we both often carry crystals, and wanted to take it with me, and I actually considered leaving it as an offering.
Right. When we go to places, we usually give offerings and be, respectful.
And it was odd because I don't usually leave a crystal. We also brought tobacco. And,
right. I love tobacco.
But I kept holding the thing in my hand, and I'm like, should I take this? I was curious. And I'm like, well, I'll just take it, and I'll see if I want to leave it or whatever. So we get there, and we go up to that big rock, and we notice other people have left offerings, and including another kind of crystal sitting at the base. A quartz crystal
quartz
at the base of the rock. And then, of course, I remembered I had mine. And I said, with a spirit box running, I said it was nice that somebody had left a crystal. And the reply is, thank you, they're gifts.
Yes.
And then I said, I've brought a crystal of my own that I'm thinking about leaving. And it says, you can. And then it says something odd like podcaster.
Yes, that's why we left it there. It said, you podcasters or something at the
right?
end. And it sounded funny, so we left that
We
part
left
at
that
the
in
end
there. We don't know if that's random radio.
It probably is, but it would just sounded funny.
Feel like the other verbiage seemed kind of to be talking to us, and
Absolutely.
we definitely felt a presence there. Like
yes,
more so than some other investigations. I felt like they were really right there, standing there. I could almost feel them talking to us. Here you go. It's just again looped, and the second time I've amplified the thank you, their gifts, and the you can part, so you can hear it clearly. And here's that.
I really like the offering somebody left of a crystal at the base of this rock. Do you like that? I thought about leaving the crystal myself. I really like the offering somebody left of a crystal at the base of this rock. Do you like that? I thought about leaving the crystal myself.
This next clip is a little bit longer. I've now got the crystal in my left hand, and I'm getting ready to leave it as an offering. I'll play the clip, and then we break it down.
Well, to my left hand, if that's what you said.
That's cool.
Cool. I feel compelled to leave. Yeah, and I had that feeling before I left, so I'm going to bury it under this rock. So everybody picks it up.
What was your Sachem's name?
So in the first part of this, you hear me talking about the amethyst crystal I had in my left hand that I left as an offering, and it immediately says
traitor.
And then it says,
that's cool.
To my left hand, if that's what you said.
That's cool.
So for this next part, I'm talking about feeling compelled to leave the crystal I had brought, which was this amethyst, and I had this idea at home to bring it, and I liked it too. It's just a small one you might keep in your pocket, and it says redemption.
Yeah, redemption. It says it has music to it, dun dun dun, and then all of a sudden it says redemption.
I feel compelled to leave. Yeah, and I had that feeling before I left, so I'm going to bury it under this rock. So everybody picks it up.
I just thought that was really strange because redemption, was I seeking redemption by leaving the offering? What did redemption mean to a Native American in a prayer town? I thought that was just kind of an interesting thing that popped up.
Mm-hmm. And then I asked after that what their sachem's name was, which sachem is chief. And we get I'm dead and Nipmuc twice.
2 times.
2 times.
Yeah, and right at the end, too, you'll hear the speaker disconnect, and that is an odd thing, too, because my phone connects, by Bluetooth to this speaker that we use also for the spirit box, and it disconnected for some reason, which is really odd.
At the same time.
I'm right in front of it, so we thought that was weird, or it reconnected. Something happened to its connection. Here's this clip.
What was your sachem's name?
So in this next clip, I'm holding the amethyst in my left hand, but it's before I buried it, and I asked if they like it, and the response may
or may not be
scalp. We'll let you decide.
Do you like this amethyst that I'm holding?
It's an interesting clip because, if in fact it is saying scalp, scalping was an occurrence that people mostly associate with the Native Americans doing to the white man, but in truth, it happened both ways.
On both sides.
There were scalpings, rapings, killings of children, real atrocities that occurred on both sides.
Right.
And we're not often taught that. This next clip, I'm asking if they can say something relevant. I said, I'm looking for some kind of confirmation. Can you please say something relevant?
And it says traitor. It comes back traitor.
Traitor. And that's pretty clear. And given that we're in a praying town and the people buried there were both considered traitors and probably considered the white man traitors, it's an interesting response.
Can you tell us something so that we know that you can hear us? Something relevant.
Traitor.
So I wanted to get back to that scalp thing that we mentioned a little bit earlier. And, I mentioned that scalping goes both ways and that we scalped the Indians and they scalped us. Although we were brought up to think that they always scalped us, right?
Right.
But in truth, there's still a little bit of controversy, even in today's news.
Right. The NFL, they have a team called the Washington Redskins.
Correct.
And most people think that, I guess you said they were being pulled.
Yeah, there was a poll, and most people are not offended by the
at all.
name Redskins, but they don't really understand it.
No, they think that it's because of the color of the Native American skin.
Which is not at all true.
It's very untrue. It's actually from them being, the Native Americans being scalped, and the white man using their scalps as currency.
And the bodies that were left over were called Redskins.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's something they didn't teach you while you were pledging allegiance and singing what?
This land is your land.
This land
Right.
is my land. From California to the New York Islands. Yeah, it's such bullshit. Because try to tell that to a Native American, right? We took all that land. And we scalped them.
That's
we called them Redskins. As we called the corpses Redskins.
Right. So that's what that term really means. And that's why it's very offensive, derogatory, and that's, I don't blame them for
Why
using it.
it's
We
a
don't like it.
controversy, and they actually protest against these things, and most people put it off because we're all too damn busy.
Not only that, didn't we watch something in Germany about...
Oh, that's right, the Germans. The Germans have made note of their problems, and they teach the Holocaust and what happened there in their schools. So kids coming up, instead of just going, hey, Germany is number one, man, from the time they are born, they at least learn, like, we made some mistakes.
We screwed up, and this is what happened, and, don't ever do this again. Now, we should have something like that in the United States.
We should, but we don't,
Because we have blinders on.
We have blinders on. We don't accept that we could possibly be responsible for any atrocities in the world when the nation's founding was actually an atrocity. But we're not alone. Lots of countries have done this. And
Very true.
Yeah, it's just good. Public awareness message. That's all. It's not political. It's just public awareness.
Right.
In the last clip at the Native American Burial Ground in Grafton, Massachusetts, I did ask a question. I said, how do you feel now about the praying town? And the response is pretty clear. And we had to bleep this on the radio, right?
Yes, we did on our show.
But you guys are lucky and get to hear it unedited. And here that is.
How do you now feel about the praying town? How do you now feel about the praying town?
So in that clip, it's pretty clear that they said,
We were fucked.
we were fucked. And I looped it twice so you could hear we were fucked and at least make out the CK in that. And it is absolutely there.
It's crazy that it literally says that.
It's so appropriate and relevant.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, we had to include that. I hope you enjoyed it. Now we're going to go into a little bit more history. So stay with us. We're going to talk a little bit about King Philip's War in Anawan's Rock.
Which they should teach that in school as well. Definitely King Philip's War.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the bloodiest Indian white man battle in history of the United States. And per capita, meaning for the population at the time, had the most deaths. So we're going to talk about that right now. Stick around. You're going to hear a little bit of history, and then we're going to get into some other very interesting Spirit Box clips. To further elaborate, the following came from, in large part, from King Philip's War, 1675 to 1676, an article on thoughtco.com by Kennedy Hickman, and History of King Philip's War on historyofmassachusetts.org by Rebecca Beatrice Brooks, as well as our own musings.
In the years following the Pilgrims' arrival in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620, the Puritan population of New England eventually began to grow, in part from learning to survive from trial and error and from the knowledge given to them by the natives.
New colonies and towns were founded through the first several decades of settlement. The Puritans maintained an uneasy but largely peaceful relationship with the neighboring Wampanoag,
Narragansett,
Nipmuc,
Picoy,
and Mohegan tribes.
Treating each group separately, the Puritans bartered European products for Native American trade goods. As the Puritan colonies began to expand and their desire for trade goods lessened, the Native Americans began exchanging land for tools and weapons.
In 1662, Metacomet became sachem,
Chief,
of the Wampanoag after the
very highly suspicious,
death of his brother Wamsutta, who had been imprisoned for 3 days in Plymouth and died shortly after release, causing tribal suspicion of the colonists.
It was thought,
Though not proven,
that Wamsutta had been poisoned. Though distrustful of the Puritans, Metacomet continued to trade with them and attempted to maintain the peace.
adopting the English name,
Philip,
Metacomet's position became increasingly tenuous as the Puritan colonies continued to grow and the
Iroquois Confederation.
began encroaching from the west.
In 1671, the colonists became suspicious
So suspicious.
that Philip was planning an attack against them and summoned him into Taunton, Massachusetts, where they questioned him and demanded that he sign a peace treaty that required the Wampanoag to surrender their arms, which he did.
Unhappy with the Puritans' continued expansion,
And having his hand forced to sell off tracts of land,
he was again suspected of planning attacks against outlying Puritan villages. In late 1674, concerned about Metacomet's intentions, one of his advisors,
John Sassamon,
a Christian convert, informed the Puritans.
though Plymouth Governor Josiah Winslow took no action, he was stunned to learn that Sassamon had been
Murdered.
in February 1675. After finding Sassamon's body,
Trapped under ice. Come on, it's a Metallica song.
in Assawampset Pond, the Puritans received intelligence that he had been killed by 3 of Metacomet's men.
An investigation led to the arrest of 3 Wampanoags who were subsequently tried and convicted of murder. Hung on June 8th, their executions were viewed as an impingement on Wampanoag sovereignty by Metacomet.
On June 20th, 1675, a band of Wampanoag warriors entered the town of Swansea, Massachusetts.
The town where Kristen is from.
On Sunday, Sabbath, while all the inhabitants were at church, the warriors looted several homes in search of weapons and then set 2 homes on fire. Fire, fire! A handful of Swansea settlers fled the town in fear.
In response, on June 21st, Plymouth Governor Josiah Winslow ordered 200 men to be raised, and Massachusetts Bay Colony officials prepared to negotiate with the Nipmuc,
Narragansett,
Niantic, and King Philip of the Wampanoags.
On June 23rd, more houses were ransacked and burned in Swansea. Either that day or the following day,
or some particular day,
a Wampanoag warrior was shot and wounded by a colonist named John Salisbury.
Later, Salisbury and 6 other settlers were ambushed and killed near Swansea Corner.
On June 24th, King Philip responded to the skirmish by ordering an attack on Swansea, which became the first official battle of King Philip's War.
After Sachem,
Chief
Metacom's death on August 12, 1676, he was replaced by trusted advisor Sachem Anawan, who would eventually be captured at, of course, what would be known as Anawan Rock in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, by Captain Benjamin Church.
Mr. Church promised Chief Anawan would not be killed if he surrendered. However, Chief Anawan was
beheaded
in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where his head would remain on display to the public for several years as it rotted and decayed.
This would mark the end somewhat of King Philip's War, although battling would continue through Rhode Island and other New England states unofficially. Anawan Rock is an enormous stone. Massive in size, it is 25 feet tall and 75 feet wide.
In the woods by Squannaconk Swamp in Rehoboth, Massachusetts.
Rehoboth is considered to be one of the most haunted of towns in Massachusetts and is located, of course, in the heart of the
Bridgewater Triangle. It is just off of Route 44, which is also known for its paranormal legend of the red-headed hitchhiker,
who is said to hitchhike and get into cars and just suddenly vanish.
When I was a child, my parents owned an antique shop right next door. For many years, I spent my time playing on and around Anawan Rock by myself, being that I was an only child. During those years, I felt that I was able to communicate with the spirits and entities at that giant rock.
Years later, I would find myself rehearsing an original rock band next to Kristen's parents' antique shop. Neither of us realized that we were crossing paths even back then, and would become a couple years later investigating that sacred spot.
So, on this particular day, in October of 2019, we went to Anawan Rock with my son, my 11-year-old son, Jacob, or Jake as he likes to be called. And we were on top of the rock, and Jake was playing and exploring towards the edge of it. You know, we were concerned, as any parent would be, and apparently so were the spirits.
So in this clip, you're going to hear Jacob called, as well as Jake, several times. And there's actually quite a bit in this clip. We're going to play it for you, and then we're going to talk about it. Here we go.
What's your name? Who's around us right now?
Jake,
Jake. Yes.
they know you're here. That's my little boy now. Jake. He needs to be careful.
So I'm sure you heard Jacob and then Jake several times, and this is actually the translation that we have.
It says, Jake, get up, stand up, get up, punish, act. And then the spirit says, he's fine. Here, stop it. Jake, Jake. Now the spirit goes, he's fine. And they start, stand up and grab her, meaning him grab me. Look, Jake, guard him.
And now I'm going to play it with a little bit of noise reduction so you can hear those words a little bit more articulately.
What's your name? Who's around us right now?
Jake,
Jake. Yes.
they know you're here. That's my little boy now. Jake. He needs to be careful.
So I'm going to play this one more time with a little bit different noise reduction. This is the original clip I used on Bigfoot and the Bunny and on our live show. And it sounds a little bit underwater, but some of the words are more articulate. And you may hear something you didn't hear the first time. So here you go.
What's your name? Who's around us right now?
Jake,
Jake. Yes.
they know you're here. That's my little boy now. Jake.
Jake.
So in this clip, I ask, who was captured here? And the answers are quite clear.
Who was captured here? What is that? Who was captured here? What is that?
So we got from this clip, whom must give back? The chief, Anawan, the traitor, you win.
Who was captured here? What is that? Who was captured here? What is that?
This next clip is pretty interesting. I asked what happened in this place, and the answer is exactly what happened in this place. It's politics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the word is politics that you want to hear. Here you go.
What happened in this place? What happened in this place?
In this next clip, I ask, is this rock sacred? And eventually you'll hear a little female voice come out and say, sacred.
Is this rock sacred?
So that is interesting, and at the end of that, I looped the word sacred, so you hear it twice at the end.
And in the beginning of that clip, you can also hear very faintly, it says, life is sacred.
Is this rock sacred?
This next clip is really interesting.
And it's really quite funny. It starts off by saying, the neighbors think that I'm a ghost.
And then I ask, who lives here? And the reply is...
Ghosts.
Ghosts.
Who lives here? Who lives here?
So just now, I thought we might get into a little bit of the history. Anawan did not get beaten or fought down. He surrendered, basically, to Captain Benjamin Church and his crew. They came in at night, and oddly enough, they ended up staying the night because their encampment near the swamp behind Anawan Rock was so far back they didn't want to walk them out. And Anawan knew he was done. He was an older man at the time. And he basically gave up. So what happened was they had dinner together.
They did.
And Church and Anawan basically stayed up looking at each other, doing the stare down game, apparently.
All night long while the Wampanoags and the Benjamin Church's soldiers slept.
Right. And at one point, Anawan got up and he walked off into the darkness and he came back with a box. At this point, coming from the darkness, Church thought he might be retaliating, trying to escape.
Might have been armed or something,
and grabbed one of Anawan's
children.
His youngest son, I believe, and held him up like a human shield. Like, how shitty is that, right?
Very. As it turns out, the box contained Metacomet's belt.
A belt that was 9 inches across and quite long. In fact, when Benjamin Church adorned it upon his shoulders, it reached his ankles.
It was called the Wampum Belt, and it had pictures of flowers, birds, and bears on it, which each told the story of the Wampanoags' history.
It had been handed down from Chief Metacomet to Chief Anawan upon his death. The box that Anawan gave to Benjamin Church contained the belt, among other treasures. In 1677, Metacomet's treasures were sent by the Plymouth Colony Governor Josiah Winslow, along with a detailed report of the conflict, to King James II, by the hand of Winslow's brother-in-law, Major Waldegrave Pelham of Essex. Not for 2 years did Winslow discover that his missive in the war spoils were never received by the king. Pelham had disappeared, owing his wife money, and was never heard from again, and the belt has gone missing. Some have rumored that it ended up in a museum in London, and that it was stolen actually out of that same museum.
And some theorize that it resides in Swansea, Massachusetts, in somebody's attic.
It is thought that if the belt was ever returned to the Wampanoag people, that the curse of the Bridgewater Triangle may be lifted. At this point, it may behoove us to tell you that Swansea is not on the official list of towns within the Bridgewater Triangle.
Yet it's on the cusp of it, and it's where King Philip's War started.
If you were to walk from one apex, that being Freetown, to the other adjacent apex, that being Seekonk, you would cut through Swansea, but yet somehow it doesn't make the list. We feel that towns like Swansea, and certainly the cursed city of Fall River, should be officially listed as towns of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Absolutely.
So in this next clip, and in all these clips, we used a old school shack hack, an old Radio Shack radio where I clipped a capacitor that allowed me to hit the seek function and have it not stop on radio stations. However, it wasn't perfected, and it occasionally does stick. So this clip, you're going to hear me ask the question, you're going to hear some banter, and then you're going to hear what is like an old English accent, the same voice as it's spanning through the channels. And that's the part that makes up the clip, really.
Right.
Is this gentleman's offering.
This is an exceptional clip. It's Old English, like Chris said.
I asked who captured him, that being Chief Anawan, and this is the response that followed.
Who captured him? Chief Anawan.
This clip says, Anawan was caught here, braved it, Chose it. Not me wish.
The most interesting part of that is that it's the same voice as it's scanning the channels, especially at the end. And it says, he braved it. He chose it. Not me wish. And it's like that person was there and talking about the surrender.
Right.
Terribly interesting.
Who captured him? Chief Anawan.
This next clip is a clip that is close to Kristen, and I've slowed it down and I've used a little bit of noise reduction through the Audacity app to take out some of the static, so you can hear everything very clearly.
Right, it's slowed down, and you can hear me ask if you knew what my dad's name was, and it comes back as Thomas, and then all of a sudden it says his name is Tommy. And not too many people know that people called him Tommy Johnson. And this pulls at my heartstrings. Here it is.
Do you remember my dad's name from next door?
I think it's Thomas.
Yeah, I think it's Thomas. You're correct. Do you remember my dad's name from next door?
I think it's Thomas.
Yeah, I think it's Thomas. You're correct.
And that concludes the Dark Horse Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm Kristen Johnson.
We love you guys and thank you so much for listening. You can catch us at www.darkhorseparanormal.com as well as
www.bigfootandthebunny.com.
Don't forget about Bigfoot and the Bunny because we have a live show on every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern at gprntalkradio.com, streamed live on YouTube by United Public Radio. Hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.